What does Pan-Africanism in particular mean to you in your art?
I think it's the erasure, for me, first of all, the erasure of the borders and the lines that were drawn up by not us. And I think the best way I have found to do that is through these emotional connections. So even like a film like Baba, my point is not the context of the story, it's what the story is about. It's what's most important is that emotion, that feeling of this child trying to protect himself. I feel like that crosses over to very many people. I wanted the victims to feel seen, is the same way I want someone from another part of the Black world to watch this and feel like, even people from Black Latin America, you watch a film and you're like, oh wow, that's exactly the same. And so for me, that's what Pan-Africanism means. Just kind of that unification of spirit, not necessarily nations.
All right, you guys, let's get into first.
There is a movement promoting our stories, and many of us grew up with a strong craving for images we can relate to. Production teams, writers, creative heads have come together to tell stories, and this podcast is their voice. The themes covered are very relevant to the Black community, and anyone concerned by the social and racial injustices that are in place to stifle this voice. The Pan-African voice is not easily heard, and here we talk about our movies, that film or doc which you heard about but didn't get to see. What was the story? Where can I watch it? It now has a voice. Tune in. We walk you through these stories and interview the filmmakers. Welcome. Karibu sana. Karibu sana.
And starting right on the lens. Ready? And action.
Why didn't you come to me? This is another episode of the Pan-African Film Podcast, and I'm here featuring the short film Baba. Today we're going to talk about that with Mbithi Masya. Did I say it right, Mbithi?
Yes, you did.
Okay.
Yes, you did.
Good. I'm so happy to have you on the podcast today. Before I do a more formal introduction, tell us in your own words a little bit about yourself and your career. You're dialing in today all the way from Nairobi, Kenya. So excited to have you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. So my name is Mbithi Masya. I'm a filmmaker and artist based in Nairobi, Kenya. Started out, I guess you could say, this artistic life in music before transitioning into film a few years ago, where I made a feature film called Kati Kati. And then after that, did a few other explorations in the art world, and now we're back with a short film called Baba.
Yeah, so, to talk more about Baba specifically, it premiered at the Toronto International Film Festival just this year. And it's about a 15-minute short about a little 6-year-old boy who lives with his aunt and cousin and mother. And then Baba kind of escapes his harsh reality of essentially a really heavy topic of domestic abuse that you choose to tackle. And the little boy teleports into a peaceful coping mechanism that he starts to rely on, and sort of its protective power, and diving into a childish imagination, right?
Yes.
And so some of the themes, as I said, are really heavy, but you talk about child abuse, dysfunctional families, I guess, coping mechanisms, childhood innocence or the loss thereof. And, feel free to add anything.
Yeah,
It's a very poetic film, I want to say.
Thank you.
Despite it tackling such heavy issues. And yeah, in addition to, your work with Kati Kati and other film work that you've done as a writer and director, you're also known for your role in the acclaimed, experimental, I guess you call yourselves an art collective, Just a Band. Yeah. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So, I am one of 4 of a group called Just a Band. We're primarily known for music, though we call ourselves an art collective just because everyone has very varied interests in things. So, I also dabble in video and visual arts. We have other members who are more illustrative and do all of these other things. But then when we all combine our powers to make music and other things around it, we're known as Just a Band. And we had been on a hiatus for a few years, but we're finally back in the studio and making music also. Yeah.
Yeah. So going off topic a little bit and more into your shoes as a member of Just a Band, how do you feel about the recent announcement of the inclusion of Afrobeats as a genre, especially in classifications out here in the US? When I listen to Just a Band, it's not Afrobeats, right?
Yeah, no, it's not. But I guess the thing is that there's like two ways to look at, that proposition of Afrobeats being like a genre, because it's big now. Ed Sheeran, Justin Bieber, everyone's singing and going because everyone's dropping an Afrobeat song. So as a genre, I think it's big enough. But I think the thing to avoid with it being looked at as a geographical thing where all African music fits there, because all African music is also not Afrobeats and all African music is not one genre. And that's what was also always the problem with the world music category. That, it's like, what are you saying? Where they throw Burna Boy and a jazz musician and, like some choir, and it's like you've just thrown four genres into one thing. Whereas, I think it's now legitimate enough for Burna Boy to be in the pop category or in the Grammys, or American Music Awards. It didn't even have to be in the Afrobeats category. I think Afrobeats is now pop music. So genre classification has always been tricky, especially in all arts segmentation and everything. It's like how Afrofuturism was a thing for a bit, and it was like, because I remember Just a Band used to be throwing Afrofuturism, and we were like, we're not being futuristic about nothing. Like we were talking about Nairobi now, and everyone's like, yo, Afrofuturism, because we had some synths in the music, and it's like synths from the 70s, like anyway, but as you can see, I have many.
That's hilarious. I'm sorry. That's hilarious. It's true, but it's true. It's hilarious because it's true. It's not even that. It's funny, not money, because it's serious.
Yeah. And African literature, it's like libraries, Barnes and Nobles will have African literature, and it's like, why would you do that when Nedi is a sci-fi writer? Just others are writing more modern day fiction, and others are writing fantasy, but you just throw them African section because they're from Africa. And I feel like we're the only ones who get that. There's no Asian section, there's no European literature section. I feel like some of it is lazy. Some of the classification is lazy.
I mean, I'm going to take it a step further, Mbithi. I feel like it's intentionally discriminatory. It's intentionally like made to put the African creative at a disadvantage. I mean,
for real.
Like nobody's always told who they are. And then, a few seconds after that, stripped even of that identity. Is just no one's, well, not without consequences anyway, except for us. So it's a hard,
even just to say, like, even just to say, like, even with the Afrobeats category, that is removing Burna Boy from the possibility of winning album of the year generally. That's, you're still handicapping it looks like it's empowering, but it's not. Like someone like Burna, who will have the biggest record in the year, now will be thrown in Afrobeats and not in single of the year or record of the year or album of the year. It's just like, come on, guys. I mean, you're not playing fair.
Yeah, that's truth. That's truth right there. And what would you say is a good way forward? I mean, I've had conversations with artists about like kind of creating a Pan-African voice. What would that voice look like for you as a creative?
Pan-Africanism, first of all, also needs to, coming from inside, needs to be more embracing and more accepting. Because I still feel like those borders and those boundaries are still out there. Because, we do have ambassadors for African stuff going out. But like, for example, myself as an East African crossing over to West or South Africa is tough. But then East Africa, I can't go into, it'll be too long to go into this, but we're more accepting of everything from everywhere else just because of how we were colonized. It was very different from everyone else's. We were conditioned to, that's why we even Kenyans, we have more British mannerisms because there was like, our conditioning was different. And so we're very accepting of stuff. So Afrobeats Piano. Everything will blow up here, just as it's blowing up in its home country. But then it's impossible for the reverse to happen. It's almost impossible for a Kenyan act, as big as they are, to blow up outside East Africa. It just doesn't work that
Why
way.
do you
And
think
that
that?
protection.
Sorry,
I think there's some protectionism in some of those countries, and it comes from pride. Obviously, it's like, nah, just we're Nigerian, we listen to Nigerian music, and I get it, but I think for Pan-Africanism to really do what it's meant to, there needs to be a lot more cross-pollinating of ideas, even as our political fathers who came up with Pan-Africanism started. They weren't just talking from their own countries. They were sharing ideas in areas. And, everyone was sharing these ideas about Pan-Africanism. But I feel like on the artistic side, it's not yet doing what it's supposed to, like in terms of crossover.
It's a shame because I've seen some collaborations and I do love them.
Yeah.
I've seen a few. I think it was like she wasn't South African. There's an artist, I don't know if she's Namibian or like from the southern region, and then she did a collabo with an East African artist, and it just sounds so cool when you actually mix up the sounds.
The sounds sound very good. There's so many songs. Angolan artists have collaborated.
I think she's
Kenyans,
Angolan.
but
Yeah.
And they sound so good. There's so many songs I love, but if you check their reach and how they did, they really didn't do what they should have, I guess.
Yeah. So that's super, and it translates obviously, needless to say, it translates over and into film as a medium. It's just kind of like a more complicated, there's the audio and then the visual, but
Exactly.
The same issues, I think, stand for film too. It's very relatable as the industry grows.
Yeah, film, literature. I think literature have done a better job. I think because of book fairs and all, the literature kind of travels a bit. But I think, all of them could stand to really, all the different art forms, film, music, literature could all stand to kind of just cross-pollinate a bit more within the Pan-African context.
That's great. Just, I guess part of me having moved to the US, I'm a little bit more direct now. So if it's, a bit too forward, I apologize. But what inspired you, to make a film about child abuse?
So it's one of those topics that I think is very familiar to many people. Let me speak for my generation, just because I think it's happened a lot to, like, personally, and also to people I know. Basically, the film came from a lot of conversations about this issue and what people went through growing up and how much of it was unsaid and unseen. And, even to the point of questioning how unseen it was. Like, was it really not seen or was it ignored? And, that was kind of where Baba began. But then also, as I was looking at it, from those conversations, I was looking at how violence in families kept transmutating into different forms and being transferred through generations in a way that was very traumatic, where some people took it and it became physical violence and abuse, and others it became this, and it's all power. It's all power connected, and it's all connected to power and how authority and power is communicated in families, which I don't think that's what families are for. They're not supposed to be little fascist parties in a house, So basically, Baba came from a lot of that exploration, just how this kind of violence is transmitted through genetics, I guess you could say.
That's really interesting. Yeah. Because these habits we then take into our lives, right? Whatever we learn at home. So it's so
exactly. For many of us, like for many people, it becomes normal until someone comes to correct you. And if no one corrects you, because some of those things, like sexual abuse, can start at such a young age that a child can think that's normal. Mm-hmm. And that's how they should exert themselves in the world. And so once they get someone who they can be powerful over, it happens again. And it's cycles that I was just trying to look at. I have no answers for it, or solutions, but I was just trying to help people who might have gone through such a situation be seen or feel seen, at least.
Yeah, I think that's important, to feel like you're not alone. I know with traumas, it's like for generally people who, go through such heavy things can feel isolated. So I think sometimes just knowing other people are going through it is helpful. And obviously the film medium is, a really interesting way to reproduce those feelings. I think you did a great job. I personally really enjoyed the element of, teleportation in the story, because I feel like, we all feel like, not just me, feel like kind of getting away from it all sometimes, don't we?
Yeah.
I think that's very powerful way to connect with your audience. But why did you choose that particular superpower for Baba?
Because it was honestly my thing that I always wanted to do as I was a kid. How kids would grow up and everyone's asking, so like, what kind of superpower would you want? What kind of power would you prefer? Flight, super strength and all of that. And I think mine always reflects between super strength and teleportation. And looking back at myself, I think, like the super strength and the teleportation are both self-preservative rather than assertive. They were more to protect myself and all. And so I've just always been, like attracted to that idea of just getting away from stuff, especially when things get too much. So it's not necessarily like a holiday power to me. It's not, yay, let's just go sightseeing. If I had that ability, to be more like when the pressure is high, I'm out. So it was more personal wish fulfillment, putting it on film.
Okay, yeah. So it's a very personal story, and we can all relate to kind of escapism, as a coping. When we get asked that question, mine was always to be able to fly. I've always wanted, and but it's a similar feeling. I guess it comes from a similar feeling, But I would also just fly for the fun of it.
Yeah,
not just to get away.
Yeah, just go up there.
Yeah, I've always just thought that would be a great superpower. But that's really interesting and so important. I'm so glad you're addressing and talking about these topics, because I do think, especially in our communities, that there isn't a space for those discussions. And like you said, it can then become kind of cyclical as a result of not airing our dirty laundry out there, right?
Exactly.
Also, I'm a mother, and so I did look at the story a little bit from a maternal perspective. Inevitably, like, you can't take that off. So, how do you think, because that's like your worst nightmare, right? And how do you think, maybe she could have been more present for her son?
I think there was, specifically with this character in this story, I think there was a little bit of denial of instinct. So it's not necessarily that the evidence was there, but if there's one thing I have learned to trust in life, is women's instincts.
Mm-hmm.
Like my wife, my mom, everyone I know, once they say they're feeling something, I'm like, okay, so we're not going that way, we're going that way, because and I've really learned to trust it. And I think for me in this story, I feel like there was this character in particular was ignoring some of those instincts that were telling us something's wrong. And in terms of the character work we did with the actors, it was, because I was building a chain of pain and trauma in the family. So it's not that it was just with the kids, but it had come from somewhere else, even for the parents. And that's why even these sisters have very polar opposite temperaments. And the main reason for that was, when we were doing the character work, if this was a bigger film, you would have seen it all. But it's that they were also in an abusive household where their father was very abusive to their mother and to them. And then they each took different sides of that, where one was, the elder sister, who probably bore more of the brunt of the abuse from the father, became like him almost, but in a way hoping to stop her son from becoming like her granddad, but by doing overcorrecting with violence. Whereas the younger sister was more in her shell, more hidden, and more, we're a happy family, the kind who would say, yeah, no, everything's fine at home, even though things are not. And that kind of putting on the blinders, I think would blind her to what's happening to her own son, in a way that if she was a bit more alert, which I think back then was a lot of that. There was a lot of denial of what's happening. How homes had domestic abuse and all that. They were smiling in church on Sunday, or stuff like that. So I think I was just playing around with a lot of that.
Yeah, no, and you get that a lot. I think people forget that we're all different. So the same situation can result in very, very different coping mechanisms for each individual, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's for sure. Like in those cases, like, blood doesn't really mean anything. You could be related, but I don't know, something dramatic happens, or you're dealing with a more gradual, like perpetual, domestic abuse situation. The end result could be like polar opposites, right? Like you said, I guess that's what you were trying to show.
Exactly.
With the siblings, and that definitely came across. And this is set like just outside Nairobi, right? In Kenya.
Mm-hmm.
But in general, like keeping with the theme of the podcast about, how this story could be completely relatable globally, really. It happens all the time, everywhere. But just want to come and circle back into more as a concept. What does Pan-Africanism in particular mean to you in your art?
In my art, I think Pan-Africanism for me also, like, I guess it merges a lot with blackness and what blackness means for me right now in my work and everything. And I think it's the erasure, for me, first of all, the erasure of the borders and the lines that were drawn up by not us. And I think the best way I have found to do that in my work, and also how I communicate with other artists from other parts of the Black world, is through these emotional connections. So even like a film like Baba, my point is not the context of the story, it's what the story is about. It's what's most important is that emotion, that feeling of this child trying to protect himself. I feel like that crosses over to very many people. And I know it crosses also races and nations and everything. But for me, I guess just from where I'm from and how I look, there's a very particular affinity to presenting our humanity to ourselves, not to others. And I'm not out here for other gazes. This is just, I'm trying to, which is what I was talking about, being seen. I wanted the victims to feel seen, is the same way I want someone from another part of the Black world to watch this and feel like, oh, someone from another part of the world feels like this. And I think because I've also been interacting a lot with Black cinema over the past few years, and I think that's the thing that draws me the most to it. Just that erasure of even people from Black Latin America. You watch a film and you're like, oh wow, that's exactly the same. And so for me, that's what Pan-Africanism means. Just kind of that unification of spirit, not necessarily nations.
Right. So just eliminating the geography aspect, and finding those common themes and sharing. So would you say, like, when you're creating them, that it sounded like you were actually making it with a Pan-African audience in mind? So when you say you wanted to bring Baba's issues to light, you wanted him to be seen by kind of people like himself, right? First.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
You got to say that. That's that part. I feel like that's the part I'm kind of like, I guess, trying to bring attention to with focusing our identity in what we do, and just saying, this is who we are, like the good, the bad, and the ugly, and this is what it means to us first, and then kind of like other second, but not in a bad way. It's just that people have been doing that to us for so long, so why not, right? Like, I kind of feel like this is a random, white happy family in Canada here, enjoy a whole 6 years of sitcom based on their life. And it's like, why not just show some of our truths about ourselves for ourselves first? And what are they? So that's an interesting perspective to bring out that, I guess to you in your mind. And so can you talk a little bit more about these Black communities and filmmaking audiences that you're been connecting with? I know you went and toured quite a few festivals with Baba.
Yeah. So even with Baba and my previous film Katikati, hopped around quite a bit, and that's how I got to meet, different filmmakers from. I expanded past Africa just because the diaspora is also for me part of this conversation, and the Black diaspora. And through that, I also started like the Nairobi Film Festival, where our primary focus was exhibition of Black cinema. That's been it. And so we primarily focus on African cinema, Black diaspora in Europe cinema and Black South America cinema. I feel like North America is covered for now, but we really wanted to expose a lot more from Latin, Middle, South America, where the Black communities are also not really highlighted there. And so there's the festival 5 years in now, and that's been also a lot, has done a lot for the conversations because we had, Q&As with the filmmakers and everything. And it's been really exploratory in seeing other worlds and seeing how much they mirror ours. And so for me, that's been also what's been encouraging. And then that's also what now I'm speaking about when I'm saying like Baba is not just made for either external eyes or just for Kenyan eyes. It's because I have seen the evidence that our experiences, our lived experiences are really similar. And even with language barriers from Portuguese to France, to French, to English, to traditional languages, it doesn't matter. Like the humor is the same. There's a lot that still clicks and still hits you where it counts.
Yeah. Wow. This is mind blowing. So I had no idea. I'm just always so happy at like what kind of comes out of these conversations about Pan-Africanism. I've always found that it's a concept that I think we all think about, but like in our own heads. So we don't actually verbalize these thoughts. I find that like when I ask the question, especially people like, yeah, I know I do this for a reason. And somehow it's usually linked. This stuff be a motivational, sometimes inspirational source. But I'm so thrilled. Let's drop some contacts. Like, where do people find? Tell me some websites, links, anything. Where do we find First Baba? What plans do you have for it? Now you've just mentioned the Nairobi Film Festival, 5 years and going. Anything you want to share for our audience?
Yeah, so the thing is, I guess it's tricky with the world as it is, where in terms of finding the content, but I would always highlight people, no matter where you are, to just look for your closest independent film festival. That's always the best way to shine a light on or to find some of these films from that might not get the traditional distribution support. In the streaming world we exist in, there's a lot that slips under the radar. And if you're in Europe, there's a lot of African Black film festivals. If you're in Africa, man, I think the best thing is to travel to some of these places like Fespaco is a wild experience. Zanzibar Film Festival, Durban, like just pick one and try it. I know that's also a very privileged and expensive answer to start with, but stepping down from there, I think there are quite a few platforms coming up that highlight African cinema. I know there's Cinema Africa, which I can't remember the website exactly, but Cinema Africa is French-based, but they also have an English version. Cinewax is what I'm talking about, not Cinema Africa. Cinewax, and they're platforming a lot of African cinema, French-speaking and English-speaking. And I think there's a few other smaller platforms I just can't remember right now. But the main thing and how we find our films, even for the Nairobi Film Festival, is connecting with a lot of festivals, seeing who's putting what on, and then trying to find them. But the problem is, once they're out of festivals, a lot of stuff kind of just disappears because of lack of distribution.
Yeah.
So it's another thing we're trying to figure out.
Well, now it has a home. Like, that's part of what I'm trying to do and what motivated me to start the Pan-African Film Podcast. As, old school, old timer producer, I get that struggle, and I'm just tired of us making these creative beauties that get stuck on the shelf. So I'm all about creating a market that's more Pan-African and facilitating the executives who need to get that distribution. But it very much sounds to me like when you definitely have a Pan-African audience and just even business mind in your approach, which is great to hear on this podcast.
Yeah, I think it's also the only way our industry will make financial sense, because that's the thing. We're kind of stuck in this Groundhog's Day of having to depend on grants and such things to make the films. And I think the shortest route to us becoming self-sustaining, and I'm not just talking about commercializing the work, but just the best way I feel like we'll get to a place where we do have that commercial aspect, but we also have the artistic aspect and everything, is when we do erase those borders and the films are crisscrossing and traveling and are truly Pan-African, as you were saying.
I mean, yeah, that's a great vision for our future for sure. But getting back to kind of you and what you like to do you prefer writing, directing, or making music? If you kind of had to pick one of, I know there's enough space for you to be all of you, but like if you had to pick a favorite.
I think my favorite bit of the process of all the work is directing. And the main reason for that is not a power trip or anything. It's because that's the place where I get to work with the most people. And because for me, that's what makes filmmaking fun, the collaborative aspect. So writing is such an isolating experience that you don't know if you're doing right, if you're going well, if you're doing that. Whereas from directing, like from the pre-production all the way to the post, there's so many people from a producer all the way down to everyone involved and everyone I get to interact with. And I found myself growing the most in that process and just listening to everyone's ideas and listening to everyone's enthusiasm. And it feeds you in a way that I'm afraid I struggle with. That's why I'm a very slow writer, because the energy just seeps out too fast. But then on a set, I'm like an energizer bunny. I don't stop just because the camaraderie is the best thing for me. So, yeah. So I guess that's my favorite bit in a long-winded answer.
Yeah, no, that's great. It sounds like you're definitely made for the director's seat and you're very much like a people person. You're definitely approachable. So I love it. I love it. I can't wait to see more work from you. And, like what are your future plans? Do you have work in the pipeline that you can share with us?
Yeah. So I'm currently just writing out a script for a feature film. And the feature film that's sort of in the scope of Baba, but not really. It's, I guess, the coming of age story of a Kenyan girl told in basically 4 chapters of her life as she was growing up in Kenya while dealing with some internal demons. And it's a bit of a fantasy tale, but also a coming of age story. And so that's what I'm currently writing. And then there's a few TV projects that I'm in development for in the pipeline. So we'll see if that happens. But yeah, so that's hopefully things will work out.
That's awesome. That's awesome. It's really great to hear that you've got so much going on. And I loved, Baba, I hope to see more just of that itself too. So thanks again for taking the time out of your schedule to join us on the Pan-African Film Podcast today. Just want to recap on where we can find some of, your work. Your personal website is mbithi.co. Just going to spell that out for the audience. That's mbithi.co, right?
Yes, that is it. And thank you so much for having me also. This was actually a very fun talk, good chat. So name is Mbithi Masya. Thank you again. As you said, website, mbithi.co. And on social media, you can find me at mbithi on everything, at Mbithi. On Twitter and Instagram, those are my main ones. I will update as the work keeps happening. I try to keep website, Twitter, and Instagram active. So if you hear this, want to talk, if you want to see some stuff, follow.
Yeah, and to all the listeners, he's super lovely, super accessible. And to repeat, your social media is all MBITHI, right?
All of it.
Okay,
all of it.
Cool.
I was early. I was very early.
And another one. Thanks again for tuning in to another episode of the Pan-African Film Podcast. We are now on Spotify and Instagram. Just search Pan-African Film Podcast to follow and like us there. Our new platform is 360 Africa. That's 360 Africa. And we want to thank our Kenyan Vibe partners. Shout out to the KV Squad. Last but not least, we thank our editor Ace. Please send us your feedback, like, follow, and comment.